Hello, I'm Roger from Stories Podcast. Whispering Pines. Section 1. Arrival. The old house stood at the end of a forgotten road, obscured by towering pines that whispered to each other in the wind. Margaret stared out of the passenger side window of the rusted pickup, watching the trees sway like sentinels. Her brother, Andrew, shifted uncomfortably in the driver's seat. "You sure this is the place?" he asked, squinting through the windshield. "It's what the letter said," Margaret replied, holding up the yellowed envelope. "Great Aunt Elise left us the house. Said it's ours now." They sat in silence as the wind scraped dry needles across the hood. The house, if one could still call it that, leaned precariously under a slate-gray sky. Its wood was bleached and warped, the porch sinking into the earth like a mouth too tired to speak. The windows stared blankly, panes long shattered or so caked with grime they may as well have been blind. Still, something about the house pulled Margaret in. It had always been a mystery in the family, a place no one talked about, not even Elise. She had vanished for years, reappearing only in letters, then not at all, until the estate notice arrived last week. Andrew cut the engine. "We're gonna regret this," he muttered. Inside, the air smelled like rot and mothballs. Dust swirled in the sunlight cutting through cracked glass. Margaret stepped across the threshold and felt a jolt in her chest. Something familiar, almost like recognition. "Did someone live here recently?" Andrew asked, running his hand over a table cluttered with dried flowers and brittle books. Margaret picked up a small porcelain doll from a shelf. Its face was cracked, one eye painted over in a black smear. "Doesn't look like it." As they moved through the hall, the house groaned. A sound like distant footsteps echoed overhead. Andrew froze. "That wasn't you, was it?" "No," she said slowly. "It came from upstairs." They looked at each other. "I'll check it out," Andrew said, trying to sound casual. He took the stairs 2 at a time, the boards creaking under him. Margaret wandered into the sitting room. A fire had once lived in the hearth, now filled with soot and dead leaves. On the mantel was a photograph. Her Aunt Elise, younger, smiling beside a man she didn't recognize. Behind them stood the very house she was now in. But the trees were younger. The windows were whole. And something about Elise's smile made her skin crawl. Upstairs, there was a crash. Margaret bolted to the stairwell. "Andrew?" No reply. Only the sound of whispering, just beyond the edge of her hearing. Section 2. The attic door. Margaret climbed the stairs slowly, each creaking board groaning beneath her like a voice warning her to turn back. The whispering had faded, but her heart thundered louder than her footsteps. When she reached the top, the hallway stretched longer than it should have. A trick of the light, maybe, or the house shifting, she told herself. "Andrew?" she called, her voice catching in her throat. Silence. Doors lined both sides of the narrow hall, most cracked open, revealing glimpses of dusty rooms frozen in time. Lace curtains drifted despite the absence of wind. A child's wooden rocking horse lay tipped on its side in one room. In another, a sewing machine stood mid-stitch, as though someone had simply gotten up and never returned. She found Andrew standing in front of the attic door at the very end of the hall. His hand was on the handle, his face pale. "It opened by itself," he said without turning. Margaret felt a chill slide down her spine. "Are you serious?" Andrew nodded. "Just swung open. No draft. No sound." The attic door stood slightly ajar now, revealing a narrow staircase swallowed by darkness. Cold air spilled down from the opening, smelling of mildew and something else. Something sweet and rotten. Margaret stepped closer. "Should we go up?" He gave her a wary look. "We could pretend this didn't happen. Close the door. Go back to the city. You know we won't," she said. "We came for answers. Together, they climbed the attic steps. Each footfall echoed strangely muffled, like the air itself was too thick to carry sound. At the top, the attic stretched wide and low, filled with old trunks, covered furniture, and hanging sheets that stirred as if breathing. In the far corner, an oil lamp flickered to life. Neither of them had touched anything.
"Did you see that?"
Andrew whispered.
"I did."
Margaret approached the lamp, her hand trembling as she reached for it. But before she could touch it, something moved beneath a white sheet nearby. Not a trick of the light, something shifted. A deliberate motion. Slow. Waiting. Andrew stepped back.
"We're not alone up here."
The whispering returned. This time, it came from behind them, and it was clearer. Two voices, maybe three, speaking in hushed tones. They spun around. No one there. And then, a child's giggle echoed softly from the shadows. Section 3. What the Trunk Held. The giggle didn't echo like a real sound. It was too close, too crisp, as if whispered directly into Margaret's ear. She turned sharply, heart hammering, but saw only dust and shadows. Andrew exhaled shakily.
"Did you hear that too?"
"Yeah," Margaret said.
"We're not imagining this."
The lamp still flickered steadily. Its wick glowed orange, untouched, feeding a flame that shouldn't exist. Margaret bent to inspect it, her eyes drawn to the light. A strange warmth radiated from it, not comforting, but cloying, like fevered breath. The brass base was engraved with tiny symbols, etched so faintly they might have been made with a needle. She couldn't read them, but they filled her with a strange unease. Then Andrew stepped closer to the covered shape, the one that had moved. Slowly, he reached out and pulled the sheet away. It wasn't furniture. It was a crib, old, with peeling white paint, and a mobile of paper stars hanging above it. The crib was empty. Or at first glance, it seemed that way. Then Margaret saw the small bundle tucked into the far corner, swaddled in dusty cloth. Andrew hesitated.
"Don't!"
But Margaret had already leaned in, her fingers pulling gently at the brittle fabric. Inside was a doll, lifelike, porcelain, and cold to the touch. Its eyes were made of black glass, wide and glinting in the lamp's light. It wore a tiny dress, hand-stitched and yellowing with age. And its face, its expression was not frozen in a smile or stare, but seemed worried, as if it knew something. She turned it over. Etched into the back of its neck was a name, Honora. Suddenly, the floor beneath them creaked, not from their weight, but from movement below. A dragging sound. Slow. Heavy. Andrew glanced toward the attic steps.
"Someone's downstairs."
They both went still. The dragging stopped. Then, from the hallway below, tap, 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 like fingernails on wood. The attic door slammed shut. Andrew ran to it, pulling, but it held fast as if nailed shut.
"It won't budge."
Margaret backed away, clutching the doll.
"We didn't close it! We didn't close it!"
As they pounded against the door, something stirred behind them. The whispering returned, but now it was louder. All around them. Chanting. Calling. Margaret turned back to the crib. It was empty. The doll was gone. Section 4. Voices in the walls. Margaret stumbled back from the empty crib, her breath catching in her throat.
"Andrew, the doll, it's gone."
He was still yanking at the attic door.
"I heard something behind us,"
he whispered, not turning around.
"But I didn't see anything."
The air in the attic had grown colder. So cold that Margaret could see her breath cloud in front of her. A low hum vibrated in the floorboards, almost imperceptible. A distant, droning pulse that seemed to echo within the walls themselves.
"I think the house is alive,"
she said, barely above a whisper. Then a voice spoke. A child's voice.
"You shouldn't have touched her."
Both siblings froze. The voice had come from somewhere inside the attic, but no body accompanied it. Just the sound, as if it seeped through the walls like smoke. Margaret turned in a slow circle, scanning the gloom. Another whisper followed. Closer.
She remembers you. Who's there?
Andrew demanded, trying to sound braver than he felt. Silence. Then a soft thump behind a stack of old trunks. They moved toward it cautiously. Margaret held up the flickering oil lamp. Its flame sputtered as if reacting to something unseen. From behind one of the trunks came a slow scraping noise. When Andrew pushed it aside, they found a narrow hole in the wall, barely wide enough to crawl through. A child could fit easily. An adult, barely.
What the hell is this?
He asked. Margaret knelt and peered inside. The passage extended into darkness, lined with wooden slats and spider webs. She could just make out markings scratched into the boards. Tally marks. Dozens. Hundreds.
She was locked in,
Margaret murmured.
Whoever Anora was, she lived in the walls.
Andrew looked around uneasily.
Let's get out of here. We'll find another way down.
Margaret stood and turned, only to stop dead. At the far end of the attic, in the corner where the crib had been, stood a little girl. She was no older than 6. Dressed in the same yellowed gown the doll had worn. Her skin was pale, translucent. Her black glass eyes stared at Margaret, unblinking. A faint smile touched her lips.
Do you remember me?
The girl asked, her voice echoing in that strange, disembodied way. Margaret couldn't speak. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, the girl vanished. Not into smoke. Not into light. She simply blinked out of existence. Section 5. Elise's Journal. The attic fell silent after the apparition vanished. Margaret's skin prickled with cold sweat. She rubbed her arms and stepped back toward Andrew.
She looked right at me,
she whispered.
like she knew me.
Andrew didn't reply right away. His eyes remained fixed on the corner where the girl had stood.
We need to leave this room. Now!
They found a narrow staircase behind a rotted armoire. A servant's stair, steep and crooked, leading down into the west wing of the house. Every step groaned beneath their feet, but the silence that had followed them from the attic held steady. Too steady. Not peaceful, watchful. They emerged in what appeared to be a study. Bookshelves lined the walls, most warped and collapsed from damp. A few intact tomes lay scattered across a wide desk, their pages curling with mold. Dust hung thick in the air, and the window shutters were nailed shut. Andrew pulled open the bottom drawer of the desk and froze. Inside lay a leather-bound book, its cover cracked but intact. The name, Elise Hargrove, was etched faintly on the spine.
Elise's Journal.
Margaret breathed. She opened it gently, flipping through pages of faded ink and increasingly erratic handwriting. The early entries were dated over 50 years ago. August 17, 1973. I've arrived. The house is colder than I remember. Father's old room still smells of smoke and mothballs. I heard footsteps last night in the walls, but I was alone. August 25th. Something is wrong here. I hear her now. A little girl. She whispers my name. She says, "Remember." But I don't remember a child. September 2nd. She came to me in the attic. Her face is porcelain. Her eyes are too black, too wide. She said I promised to take her away, that I left her instead. I don't know who she is. September 10th. Anora. Her name is Anora, and she hates me now. Margaret closed the journal, her heart racing.
She saw her too. Elise saw the same girl.
Andrew looked uneasy.
Then what happened to her?
As if in answer, something crashed in the hallway just beyond the study. A heavy, dragging sound. like furniture being shoved across the floor. Then the doorknob began to rattle. Once, twice. Section 6. Behind the door. The rattling grew louder, metal grinding against old wood. The door handle jerked back and forth, not like someone was trying to enter, but like they already belonged inside and were angry to find it shut. Andrew stepped in front of Margaret, gripping the edge of the desk like a weapon.
If that thing opens, we run.
But the door didn't open. It stopped. Total silence. Then a knock. Not frantic. Not aggressive. Just one slow knock. A pause. Then another. Then a third. 3 precise knocks, like a ritual. Margaret backed toward the far wall.
She's testing us.
Andrew turned the old key still lodged in the lock. It was brittle with age, but shifted with effort. The tumblers clicked. The door was now locked. For whatever good that might do. They waited in silence, breath held. No more rattling. No knock. Just that distant whisper again, softer now, but everywhere. Like the house itself was exhaling.
She said Elise made a promise,
Margaret murmured, still holding the journal.
And Nora feels abandoned.
Andrew paced near the boarded window, peering through a crack in the slats.
How does a child even get trapped in a place like this? And why would Elise lie about it? She never spoke about this place.
Margaret thought of the journal.
What if she couldn't? What if Nora didn't let her?
Suddenly, the lamp on the desk flickered, and something new stirred in the room. A sound like static, soft and grating. The radio on the shelf, an old, battery-powered one, came alive without warning. The dial turned on its own, the knob twitching like a nervous finger. A garbled voice broke through the white noise.
Stay in the light. She doesn't like the light.
Then a burst of static. Then silence. Andrew picked up the radio.
Did you hear that? Who was that?
But Margaret's eyes were fixed on the journal again. She flipped toward the final pages. October 5th. I found the trunk in the cellar. It wasn't empty. There were bones. Small ones. She's not a ghost. She's a memory that feeds on guilt. She was left here. Alone. October 7th. I tried to bury her. She came back. Said it wasn't enough. She wants to be remembered. A soft noise interrupted her thoughts. A sliding sound. She turned toward the far bookshelf. One of the shelves had shifted open, revealing a hidden passage. Inside, complete darkness. And at the end of that black tunnel, a whisper.
Come see what Elise forgot.
Section 7. The hidden passage. The bookshelf groaned as it slid further open, the darkness beyond absolute. The air from the passage was damp and still. It didn't feel like it had been opened in years, maybe decades. A low, earthy smell crept out. Mold, rot, and something else. Coppery. Like blood. Margaret clutched the oil lamp tighter.
We can't ignore this. We need to see where it leads.
Andrew hesitated.
This house wants us to follow it. You realize that, right?
She nodded grimly.
Yes, but maybe it's the only way to end this.
They stepped into the tunnel. The lamp's flame flickered wildly, the light barely reaching the walls. The passage was narrow, just wide enough to walk single file, and the walls were lined with rotting boards, covered in scratches. Not tool marks. Fingernails. Dozens of them. Some faint, others deep, jagged, frantic, pleading. Andrew didn't say a word. He just pressed forward, jaw clenched. The whispers followed them. No longer surrounding them, but moving ahead, just beyond the glow of the lamp. Beckoning. After several winding turns, the tunnel opened into a small chamber beneath the house. It looked like an unfinished root cellar, with stone walls and damp soil underfoot. A single wooden trunk sat in the center, its surface blackened by time, the lid warped. Margaret approached it slowly.
This must be the one Elise wrote about.
She knelt and touched the lid. It was cold, far colder than it should have been. She lifted it. Inside, there was no lining, just dirt. And beneath the dirt, fragments of bone, tiny, child-sized, arranged with unnatural care. But that wasn't all. Wrapped in faded linen was a second doll, identical to Enora. Only this one had no eyes, just hollow sockets and a crack running down its porcelain cheek. Margaret gasped.
Why would someone bury this here?
From the shadows behind them, a voice answered.
Because she wasn't finished yet.
They spun around. Standing in the corner of the cellar, half hidden in the dark, was Elise. Or what remained of her. Section 8. What's left of Elise? Elise didn't move. Her body leaned unnaturally against the stone wall, spine arched like a puppet with slack strings. Her face was pale, almost gray, lips parted slightly. Her eyes were open, glassy and unblinking. But it wasn't death that made Margaret shudder. It was the fact that Elise smiled.
Elise?
Margaret's voice trembled. Andrew reached out cautiously.
She's not alive, is she?
And then Elise blinked. Only once. The smile stretched wider.
You came back,
she said in a voice dry as autumn leaves. Margaret took a shaky step forward, the oil lamp quivering in her hand.
Why didn't you ever tell anyone what happened here?
Elise tilted her head. Bones cracked.
She said if I spoke of her, she'd stay forever. That's what she wanted. To never be forgotten.
Her voice cracked, descending into a rasp.
I tried to bury her. She came back. Again and again.
Andrew stared, horrified.
You mean Enora?
Elise's smile vanished.
That wasn't her real name.
Margaret frowned.
What was it? She has no name. That's the power she holds. We gave her one because we were afraid of her.
Elise's eyes darkened.
But she was always something else. She was born of this house.
A low moan vibrated through the walls of the cellar. The lamp flickered violently.
She's here,
Elise whispered.
She knows you're here, and she remembers you.
Suddenly, Elise's back arched sharply, pulled by invisible strings. Her mouth fell open, and a horrible wail poured out. But it wasn't her voice. It was a child's scream, echoing as if from a well. The walls trembled. Stones shook loose from the ceiling above. Dust rained down as Margaret and Andrew backed away.
Elise,
Margaret shouted.
We have to get you out of here.
But Elise's eyes had gone empty again. Her body hung limp in midair, suspended by nothing. Then she was yanked backward, into the stone. Not crushed, not struck, swallowed. The wall seemed to absorb her, pulling her form into itself like clay giving way to rot. Andrew screamed.
We need to go. Now!
They ran, back through the narrow passage, the lamp guttering wildly, shadows reaching from the walls like arms. Behind them, the stone groaned, and the whispers became laughter. Section 9. The house remembers. They burst from the hidden passage into the study, gasping for breath. Margaret slammed the bookshelf shut, its frame protesting with a loud thunk. For a moment, there was only silence, thick electric silence, the kind that hums in the bones. Andrew doubled over, hands on his knees.
That wasn't possible. That wall ate her.
Margaret stood frozen, her grip still tight around the journal and lamp.
She tried to warn us. She tried, but it's too late. The house won't let us leave now.
Andrew looked up.
We're not trapped. We just need to get outside. We can burn the place, destroy whatever's holding her here.
Margaret's voice was hollow.
It's not just her anymore. Elise said she wasn't really a ghost, that she's something the house made.
Andrew moved to the study door. The handle turned. He flung it open. The hallway beyond wasn't the same. It was longer. The walls were no longer peeling plaster but old stone, slick with damp. Roots jutted from between cracks in the floor. A lantern burned on a distant hook, flickering like a dying heartbeat.
"This wasn't here before,"
he whispered.
"No,"
Margaret said.
"it's shifting, rebuilding itself. For us."
They stepped into the new corridor, drawn forward by the lantern's pull. Their footsteps echoed strangely, swallowed too quickly by the air. Along the walls, etched into the stone like veins, were names. Elise, Jareth, Ivy, Meredith, and dozens more, faint, some nearly worn away.
"What is this?"
Margaret asked. Andrew ran a hand over the nearest name.
"A ledger? Or a graveyard?"
Margaret whispered. As they reached the lantern, it flared, illuminating an alcove ahead. There, nailed to the wall with rusted iron spikes, was a series of old photographs. Some were black and white, others faded to orange with age. All showed children, each with wide, glassy eyes, each wearing the same yellowed gown. And in the center of every photo, always just at the edge of the frame, Nora, sometimes as a doll, sometimes a girl, but in the final photo, she stood front and center, smiling, holding hands with Elise. Beneath it, scrawled in uneven handwriting,
"You always come back. You never leave."
Section 10. The Children Who Stayed. Margaret reached toward the photographs, her fingers trembling as they hovered over the final one. The image was old, but there was no mistaking the two figures. Elise, perhaps in her 20s, and the little girl in the yellow gown, grinning as though the camera caught her mid-laughter. But the longer Margaret stared, the more the girl's face began to shift. Her eyes were wrong, too wide. Her smile curved just slightly too far at the corners, like the grin wasn't hers at all, but something worn.
"Andrew," she whispered, "these children, these are all the ones who came here, or were taken."
He was staring at the names on the walls again.
"They weren't just visitors. They were claimed."
Margaret turned to him, eyes wide.
"What if Elise wasn't the first? What if she was just the one who remembered, who lived long enough to write it down?"
They both fell silent as a new sound rose from deep within the stone corridor, the soft patter of footsteps. Bare feet, slapping gently against the floor. Andrew raised the lantern, and the light swayed across the hall. A shape stood ahead, small, still. The girl again, Nora. She watched them with her dark, reflective eyes, that slight smile still resting on her pale lips. But now her hands were stretched at her sides, and behind her, others began to appear. More children, dozens, silent, pale, dressed in old-fashioned clothes, nightgowns, or nothing but rags. Some held toys. One cradled a broken teddy bear. Another clutched a cracked teacup. All stared with the same expression, calm but hollow. Margaret felt the air grow thick, like she was breathing through syrup. Nora took a step forward.
"You came back for us,"
she said softly.
"Just like she promised."
Margaret's mouth went dry.
"Who promised?"
Nora tilted her head.
"You did."
Margaret shook her head, stepping back.
I never. You always forget. But the house remembers,"
Nora said.
"You told us you'd help."
"You said we could leave, but you left us instead."
Andrew raised the lantern higher, the flame flickering wildly as the temperature dropped. Honora's expression darkened.
"You lied."
The light sputtered. The children all took one step forward together. Then the lantern went out.
11. In the dark with them. The instant the lantern went out, the hallway became absolute shadow. Not the soft dark of night, but something thicker, unnatural, a living dark. Margaret froze, clutching the cold metal of the useless lantern.
Andrew?
She whispered.
I'm here.
He replied, voice low and close, but she couldn't see him. She reached out, but there was only air. Then came the sounds. Whispers, closer than ever, right at her ear. Tiny feet shuffling on stone. The faint rustle of fabric. A wet breath. And then,
why did you leave us?
She turned in the dark, heart pounding.
I don't know who you are.
But the voice didn't stop.
Liar.
Another voice joined it. And another. Soon, the space filled with dozens of whispering children. Angry, hurt, betrayed.
You promised. You lied. You left us in the dark. You never came back.
Margaret stumbled back, arms outstretched, hoping to find a wall. Something. But instead her hand touched skin. Cold, damp skin. She recoiled, but the hand grasped hers. Small fingers wrapped around her wrist.
Remember?
Enora said. And then everything changed. Suddenly, the hallway was gone. Margaret stood in a room she didn't recognize, bright and warm. A nursery. Sunlight poured in through open windows. Toys lay scattered across the floor. And in the center, a little girl sat on a red rug, braiding a doll's hair.
Hello?
Margaret whispered. The girl looked up. It was Enora. But she was alive. Pink-cheeked. Smiling.
You came back,
she said, voice sweet and bright. Margaret's legs felt weak.
What is this? Our room,
Enora replied.
Before you forgot. Before the promise.
Then a door slammed somewhere in the house. Loud, sharp. The light dimmed. Enora flinched.
She's coming.
Who? The girl's eyes filled with sudden terror.
Mother.
The window panes cracked. The wallpaper peeled like skin. The sunlight burned away in an instant, and Margaret was no longer in the nursery. She was back in the hallway. The light flickered back into the lantern Andrew held. His face was pale, eyes wide.
You disappeared. For maybe a second. Maybe a minute. I don't know. You just vanished.
Margaret's voice was hollow.
She showed me the room. Where it happened. She said her mother was coming.
Andrew's eyes darkened.
Then we need to find the heart of this place. Before she does.
Section 12. Mother's Room. The lantern's glow flickered as the siblings moved deeper down the stone corridor. The carved names on the wall grew more frantic now, scratched over each other, some etched upside down or backward. Some were just initials. Some were please. Help US. She waits in the roots. No light, no escape. Margaret kept Elise's journal tucked under one arm, flipping it open with trembling fingers.
There's a room she never wrote about,
she said quietly.
A door she refused to open.
Andrew glanced over his shoulder.
Then that's where we're going, isn't it?
She nodded. As they turned a final corner, the corridor abruptly ended at a large, rotted wooden door bound in iron. It was covered in old handprints, child-sized, smeared in dark, long-dried stains. Dozens of them. Some dragged downward. Some with fingers missing.
No lock,
Andrew said.
But it hasn't been opened in a long time.
He reached for the handle. Margaret grabbed his wrist. Wait. What if this is where she keeps them?
Andrew looked at her.
Then it's where we take them back.
With a deep breath, he pushed the door open. The room beyond was impossibly vast. Not like a cellar or chamber. It felt wrong, like it didn't belong inside the house, or even beneath it. The ceiling arched high, lost in shadows. Roots snaked down the walls like veins. At the far end stood a massive, gnarled crib, far too large for any child. It rested atop a mound of soil. The air reeked of decay. thick with the sickly sweet scent of rot and flowers left too long in a vase. And beside the crib, a woman. She was tall, unnaturally tall, with limbs too long and thin, her fingers crooked like snapped branches. Her skin was papery and gray, stretched tight over her bones. Her hair hung in tangled ropes. She wore a faded black dress that dragged behind her like a shroud. Her face was turned away, staring into the crib. Neither of them moved. Then the woman spoke, in a voice like wine through dead leaves. She cries when no one comes. Margaret's voice shook. Are you Honora's mother? The woman didn't turn around. I was once, but you took her from me. Andrew stepped forward, defiant. No one took her. You locked her here. You let her die. She died, the woman whispered, because someone forgot her. Then, slowly, she turned. Her face was featureless, no eyes, no nose. Just a faint, lipless mouth that stretched wider and wider as she stepped forward. You forgot all of them. And behind her, the crib began to move. Section 13. What sleeps beneath? The crib groaned as it shifted, wooden legs scraping across the dirt floor, roots tearing up around it. Something inside stirred, the blankets rising and falling with the rhythm of shallow, unnatural breath. Andrew raised the lantern higher. Margaret, he whispered, we can't let whatever's in there wake up. But Margaret's gaze was fixed on the faceless woman. She doesn't see us, she said. She's not looking. She's remembering. The woman stood still as a statue now, arms folded stiffly. She tilted her head, as if listening to voices only she could hear. And from the crib came a wet cooing sound. Margaret stepped forward. What are you doing? Andrew hissed, grabbing her arm. I have to see. No, you don't. We came here to finish this, not feed it. But Margaret pulled away. The house was whispering again, not in anger, but in longing. A soft murmur like a mother's lullaby, humming through the floorboards and the bones beneath them. It was calling her. She reached the crib. The figure inside was wrapped in yellowing linens, its body twitching in subtle, jerking spasms. One tiny porcelain hand poked out from under the blanket, cracked, stained, but moving. Not a baby. A doll. It turned its head. Honora's doll face stared up at her, its eyes now open, blinking slowly. But it wasn't just porcelain anymore. Its cheeks pulsed. Its mouth twitched. It was becoming alive. She doesn't want to sleep anymore, the faceless mother whispered from behind. Andrew lunged forward. Margaret, we need to burn it. Now! But the doll let out a sound, a whimper so sad, so familiar, Margaret froze. She remembered something. A room. A promise. A child clutching her hand, whispering, Don't forget me. Don't forget. She was mine, Margaret said aloud. Andrew turned sharply. What? I knew her, she said. When I was little, I stayed here. Elise watched us both. And Nora wasn't real, not like me. She was lonely. She made herself out of the house. From our games. From stories we told. But when I left, she stayed. I forgot her. The doll's lips parted. Margaret, it whispered, will you take me with you this time? Behind them, the roots along the walls began to twist, reaching out. The faceless mother raised her arms, and her body began to crack down the middle, opening like dry bark to reveal a writhing shape beneath, something childlike and not. Andrew shouted, Get away from the crib. But Margaret was already picking it up. Section 14. The thing she made. The doll was warm. Not in the way a child is warm, but in the way something unnatural mimics warmth, like heat drawn from blood that wasn't its own. Margaret cradled it anyway. Its small porcelain limbs twitched, eyes fluttering as if waking from a centuries-long dream.
Andrew backed away from the twisting roots, eyes wide.
We need to go. That thing, whatever she is, she's unraveling.
The faceless mother stood unmoving as her form cracked wider, revealing dozens of tiny limbs within, hands of all shapes and sizes reaching out, clenching, grasping. The black fabric of her gown flared as if breathing. Her mouth opened impossibly wide.
She came back.
The faceless woman hissed, her voice suddenly a chorus of children.
You're not her mother,
Margaret said.
You were never any of their mothers. You're a lie the house tells.
The mother hissed and lunged. Andrew grabbed Margaret by the wrist and yanked her back just as the wall behind them split open with a deep, tearing moan. Roots fell away like peeled skin, revealing a spiral staircase cut into stone, descending even deeper.
Go!
He shouted. They ran. The staircase was steep and slick, the air cold and wet. Screams echoed behind them, hundreds of them, echoes of children trapped in walls, in dreams, in memories twisted by guilt. Margaret clutched the doll to her chest. She could feel it pulse. At the bottom of the stairs lay a small chamber. Not carved, not built. Grown. The walls were thick with veins of root and sinew. In the center stood a single black tree, leafless, bark smooth like bone. Dozens of small dolls hung from its branches by strings made of hair. And beneath it, a fire pit, cold, filled with ash and scorched bones. Andrew stopped short.
What is this place? The heart,
Margaret said.
This is where the house feeds.
The doll stirred in her arms.
Burn me,
it whispered. Margaret flinched.
What? Burn me, or I'll become her. Again.
She stared at the pit.
No more promises,
the doll said, its voice smaller now.
You don't get to leave me again.
Margaret's hands trembled. Could she do it? Could she destroy the thing she created, abandoned? The fragment of her childhood made into a monster? Andrew stepped forward.
Margaret, now. Before it's too late.
And above them, the mother screamed. Section 15. Ashes and Echoes. The scream shook the chamber, a raw howl that rattled Margaret's bones. The tree above them groaned as if alive, its hanging dolls twitching on their strings. Some of them whispered her name.
Margaret, you left us. You lied.
The doll in her arms, Anora, or whatever was left of her, began to twist. Its limbs grew longer. The porcelain cracked, revealing glimpses of something dark and pulsing beneath. Its eyes, once painted glass, were now bottomless pits reflecting Margaret's own terrified face.
Please,
it whispered again, weakly this time.
Don't let me become her.
Margaret looked down into the fire pit, cold and dead now, but layered with old ash, bone fragments, scorched cloth.
This was Elisa's plan,
she said.
She tried to burn her, tried to finish it, but she waited too long,
Andrew said.
And now it's your turn.
The screaming grew closer, clawing, dragging, tearing through stone and root. The faceless woman was coming. And she was no longer just a figure. She was every child the house had taken, twisted into one. Margaret knelt by the fire pit, her heart thudding so loudly she couldn't hear her own breath. Her hand reached into the ash. Warm, still warm. The tree groaned again, and from above, one of the dolls snapped from its string and dropped to the floor. It cracked, empty inside. Margaret whispered to the doll in her arms.
I remember you now. I remember your stories, your games. I remember how I left.
The doll blinked slowly.
I'm sorry,
Margaret said.
But I can't let you keep growing.
She laid it into the ashes. It didn't scream, didn't struggle. It just closed its eyes. And then Margaret struck a match. The flame flared, blue at the edges. She dropped it. The ashes ignited with sudden, violent hunger,
The pit roared to life, and the roots recoiled from the flames, hissing and twisting. The tree screamed, with splitting, dolls falling and shattering like glass around them. Above, the house howled. The faceless woman staggered into the chamber's mouth, her form splitting, melting, dissolving as the fire grew. Her limbs crumbled. Her mouth opened in a final, wordless scream, and she collapsed, burning into ash. The fire climbed the tree, devouring it from within. The whispering stopped. The air went still. Margaret and Andrew stood in silence, watching the heart of the house turn to smoke and memory. Then, stone by stone, the chamber began to collapse. Section 16. Collapse. The fire roared like a living thing, consuming the tree and everything it touched. The ash rose in spirals, carried by unseen currents, trailing up into the cracks in the ceiling. The ground trembled under their feet. Time to run. Andrew grabbed Margaret's arm. The chamber began to fall apart. Chunks of stone cracked from the ceiling and crashed to the ground as the roots recoiled violently, flailing through the air like severed tendons. The dolls that hadn't already burned twisted and burst, each popping like a rotten fruit. They sprinted back toward the stairwell, but the passage behind them had already started to collapse. Debris blocked the path. The stairs cracked under their weight. Andrew nearly slipped as a root lashed past his head, hissing. "This way!" Margaret cried, spotting a narrow side tunnel where the wall had split. She ducked through, Andrew close behind. The tunnel was tighter, but it angled upward. Stone gave way to soil. Soil gave way to old wood, then a door. Heavy, nailed shut from the inside. Andrew rammed his shoulder into it once, twice. The third time it gave way. They tumbled into daylight. Real daylight. They were outside. The forest greeted them with damp wind and silence. Not the dead silence they'd come to expect, but natural, wild silence. The kind that breathes. Behind them, the manor groaned. They turned just in time to see the roof of the west wing cave inward. A column of smoke rose from the heart of the house. The windows shattered one by one, soft pops, like distant fireworks. Roots burst from the ground around the foundation and shriveled in the sun. And then, it was still. Whispering Pines had gone quiet. For the first time in years, maybe ever. They stood in the overgrown clearing, breathing hard, the fire's heat still in their lungs. Margaret looked down at her arms. Empty. The doll was gone. Not broken. Not crumbled. Just vanished. Andrew sat on a fallen log, shaking his head. That was real, wasn't it? Too real. Margaret looked back at the ruined house. Do you remember what she said? About forgetting? Andrew nodded. That's how she fed. I wonder how many more are out there. How many houses like this? How many forgotten promises? Andrew stood slowly. Maybe it's not about houses. Maybe it's about people. The things we leave behind. The ones we bury too deep. They stood together in silence for a long time. Then Margaret reached into her coat pocket and pulled out Elise's journal. It was burned at the edges, but still intact. She flipped to the final page. Blank. But as they watched, letters began to etch themselves into the page, like invisible ink rising in sunlight. Thank you. Section 17. A house without windows. They didn't speak again until the sun was nearly gone. The woods around Whispering Pines had grown quiet in a different way. Not eerie, not wrong, just waiting. Like something had been removed from the land, leaving a hollow behind. Margaret held the journal tightly to her chest. I think she was trying to stop it, she said. Elise, all those years, I think she stayed just long enough to keep it contained. Andrew, sitting with his back to a moss-covered tree, looked back at the smoldering ruins. Until she couldn't anymore. Until the guild got too loud.
Margaret nodded.
It always does.
The sun dropped below the trees, casting long shadows across the clearing. The house was still, but not completely gone. Its bones half standing, its wounds smoking. A broken rib cage of blackened timbers. But no more whispers. No more shifting rooms. The silence was honest.
I still remember her,
Margaret said after a while.
and Nora. The games. Her laugh.
It wasn't always evil. She was sweet once. Lonely. Then I left.
Andrew finally asked what he'd been holding in since the fire.
Was she real?
Margaret didn't answer at first. Then,
She was something real enough to miss me.
the wind stirred the grass. They walked to the edge of the clearing and looked back one last time. And that's when Margaret saw it. Through the haze of smoke, inside the one surviving window frame on the second floor, a small silhouette stood watching them. Unmoving. A little girl in a yellow gown. But not angry. Just watching. Margaret lifted a hand. The silhouette raised one in return. Then the smoke thickened, and she was gone. They turned away together, left the grounds. The forest seemed to part for them. Back at the car, the air was cooler, more grounded. When Andrew turned the key, the engine started without hesitation. Before she closed the passenger door, Margaret looked back once more. The house was now just ruins, black and gray, silent.
But in the woods, just beyond view, a winching sounded, and then stopped. Section 18, The Hollow Road. The ride back to town was almost peaceful. The road twisted through the forest like it always had, yet it felt changed, like the trees were no longer watching. The air was clearer. The horizon felt wider somehow, like the weight of a memory had been peeled away from the sky itself. But neither of them spoke for miles. Margaret held Elise's journal in her lap, fingers tracing the edges of the burned pages. She couldn't stop thinking about that final message.
Thank you.
Not goodbye. Not it's over. Just that, thank you. As if a debt had been paid, but something still remained. She flipped to the beginning again. The earliest entries still spoke of loneliness, of noises in the walls, of something just out of reach. Margaret wondered if Elise had seen the same girl she remembered all those years ago, or if Honora had changed over time, twisted further each time someone forgot her. Andrew finally broke the silence.
What now?
Margaret didn't answer at first.
We go home. We tell people what happened. Who's going to believe us? I don't care if they believe,
She said.
I just want them to remember.
He nodded.
And the journal? I'll copy it. Every page. I'll put it online. I'll print it. Leave copies at libraries. At schools. Anywhere people forget the most. You think that'll be enough?
Margaret looked out the window.
No. But it's a start.
They crossed the old wooden bridge into Ashcroft just as dusk fell, the town's lights flickering on one by one. Children rode bikes. Sprinklers buzzed in distant yards. The world, it seemed, had moved on without them. But Margaret felt something else now. Something still watching. That night, as she tried to sleep, she awoke 3 times, always at the same minute, 3:33 a.m. Each time, her room was cold. Each time, she thought she heard whispering just behind the walls. Not angry, not threatening, just present, as if someone wanted to make sure she hadn't forgotten again. Section 19. Something left behind. The next morning, Margaret found something strange outside her apartment door. A small package. No return address. No postage. Just her name, written in tight cursive across the brown paper. She opened it carefully. Inside was a single object, wrapped in faded yellow cloth. Her hands froze. She unwrapped it slowly, and gasped. It was the doll. Not the one that burned in the fire. Not exactly. This one was smaller, uncracked, but the gown was identical. The face softer, childlike, and pinned to its chest with a rusted sewing needle was a note written in Elise's handwriting. You remembered. So she will sleep, but only as long as you do. Margaret sat back against the wall, heart racing. Not again, she whispered. I burned you. I ended this. But the doll didn't move. Its glass eyes just stared at the ceiling. She couldn't throw it away, couldn't bury it, couldn't even bring herself to put it in another room. So she set it on a shelf beside her bed. And that night, at 3:33 a.m., she awoke again. Not from a sound, but from a feeling, like someone was sitting at the foot of her bed. She turned the lamp on. No one was there, except the doll. Its head was tilted, just slightly, toward her. The next week, Andrew called in a panic. She's here, he said. Margaret's throat tightened. Who? He didn't have to say it. She could hear her, even over the phone. That soft little voice humming the melody from the nursery. Don't forget, don't forget. Andrew kept speaking, but the line grew distorted. The hum grew louder. Then, click. Silence. Margaret stared at the phone for a long time. The next morning, she found his copy of Elise's journal on her doorstep, charred at the edges, with a note written in Andrew's handwriting. One of us forgot. Don't be the next. Section 20. The Ones Who Remember. Margaret no longer dreamed. She didn't sleep much either. The doll still sat on the shelf by her bed, untouched, unmoving. But sometimes she swore its position changed slightly. A hand tilted. A foot turned. The glass eyes, she was certain, followed her now. But she kept it there anyway, because she knew what would happen if she didn't. She started posting Elise's journal online, one page at a time. She wrote articles under a pseudonym, turned fragments into horror stories and urban legends. She submitted copies of the files to small press archives and community message boards, always under different names. She made sure someone was always reading. And it helped for a while. Until the letters started coming. From strangers. I dreamed of the girl in yellow. I thought she was just imaginary. I used to play in an old house that sounds just like this one. I think she followed me from the woods. Then one letter arrived with no return address. Just 4 words, written in red ink. She remembers you too. Margaret moved to a new city. Started again, but the whispers followed. They were soft at first. A child's laugh in the walls. A gentle knock at 3:33 a.m. Then the doll disappeared from her shelf, and she found it inside her closet. The next night, under her bed. Then, sitting in the driver's seat of her locked car. She never saw it move. It was never caught in motion, but it was always closer. She began to wonder, was it really Enora anymore? Or had the house become her? Then came the day the email arrived. Subject line, Whispering Pines, you left something here. No message. Just a single attachment. An image, blurry, of Margaret, as a little girl, sitting on the nursery floor in the yellow house, next to Enora, both smiling, both holding the doll. Behind them, a shadow in the doorway, tall, faceless, and somewhere in a house that shouldn't exist anymore, a floorboard creaks, a lullaby hums, a candle flickers to life, because someone remembered, and someone else forgot. The end. Thank you for listening podcast. Please like and subscribe the channel.